is going to be a game changer, because most people, honestly, walking among us are calorically full, but nutritionally they're starving. Like, there's some people who haven't eaten in months or years.
The question for today's episode will be, how do you build a better relationship with food? Also, today's guest for the episode will be health coach, plant protocol founder, and podcaster Lisa Smith, along with nutritionist Bruce Mensa.
I'll go ahead and start us off, give a little bit of preface. So a little bit of backstory behind, what birthed this question is a conversation that we had off air a little while ago, probably around the summer or spring of last year. And the main thing that sparked it was our journey in physical health. A lot of us were hitting the gym, going really hard. I think during that time I maybe weighed like 160, close to 170. And right now I'm dropped significantly. I'm back closer to 150. And I remember having a conversation with Brian, and we were just talking a lot about, our progress and, maybe on my end, why I slowed down a bit. And when I really sat down and I thought about my true reason was my mental health, and I think in, the major, or not major, but in the modern day, whether we're scrolling Instagram, whether we're looking at fitness articles, either we're just looking at, fitness clothes, it's always fitness, physical health. And physical health is really, really great. But if you do not have the mental health to match that physical health, then you'll never truly be at a place of peace. And so as I look at the main ingredients of physical health and the main ingredient of mental health, we get to gut health. And when you get to gut health, you don't even just stay in the realm of, physical health and then mental health. Or I guess you could say you do stay in that, but you expound on it. And that gets you into anxiety, depression, these things that plague not just the people that are in the gyms, but people that are out of the gyms as well. The younger Black communities, the inner city Blacks, and then even the affluent Black people as well. We don't have a great relationship with food. And, that may boil down to how our ancestors' relationship with food manifested into us, whether that be the pork chops, the ham hocks, the heavily seasoned greens, the mac and cheese, whatever it may be, whether it's these heavy, dairy-based diets, or whether it's heavy protein-based diets, to where we're not truly understanding, the necessity behind regulating our hormones. And I think, that regulating our hormones, it all comes down to gut health. And so, the guest that we have today, of course, another manifestation of Brian's great guest picking. They're two great thinkers, two great, I guess you could say provocateurs in the field of mental and, gut health. And they're going to expound on that a little bit for us.
And now to take a brief pause from today's episode for our Business of the Week segment. This week's Business of the Week is Kiwi Teas by Soul Stir, co-owned by sisters, tea lovers, and holistic wellness advocates Christina and Aaron Walden. The sisters, who have a love for food and beverage, handcrafted goods, and holistic living, were inspired to merge their passions to create an all-natural, eco-friendly artisan tea brand eponymously named Kiwi, Christina and Aaron Walden-inspired teas. My personal favorite, after our citrus fusion blend, of course, is their sweet mahogany roast. Check out their website to place your order today. Now back to the episode.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Desmond. When it comes to gut health, or let's say just into nutrition in general, I think one of the main things that like everyone forgets is that nutrition is really the building blocks of your body. So we're always focused on, having this outward appearance, always focused on, we want to be the next buff guy that you see on Instagram, buff guy or girl that everybody's looking up to, everybody's trying to be like. But like you said, if we're not matching our insides, our internal clocks, our internal mentalities, our internal functioning with the outward's never going to happen. It's never going to be sustainable. And I think that's really the root cause of a lot of things like eating disorders and body dysmorphia, just unhealthy lifestyle in general, like diabetes, cardiovascular disease. all of it, just the list keeps going on and on, because we're so focused on, we're trying to fix ourselves from the outside going in instead of the inside going out. So it's just a reoccurring problem that I've found with several different clients, several different populations that I've worked with so far. And, you know, it's sadly, it's just the message that the media gives us consistently. So
what's your prognosis as far as a solution for building a healthier relationship with food?
Yeah, normally what I do initially with a client is, you know, I get their background as to how their relationship with food started, kind of like what they're normally doing and what they did before, maybe even what they've tried in the past. Because ultimately, even though this isn't how it should be, the main reason why people come to seek help from a dietitian, from a nutritionist, whatever it might be, is because they're starting with that outward appearance that they're trying to achieve. So that's always the start of it. So of course we have to address that, but I usually try to use that as a launching point to help them. Okay, so if that's what your goal is, there are all these other things, all the other dominoes that have fallen apart. So before we get to that, let me talk to you about all this other stuff. Let me talk to you about how you ate when you were growing up, how that possibly led you to where you are, and what we can do differently to get to a different future than what you are currently leading to. Because of course, unless they were leading where they wanted to, they wouldn't have, you know, came to talk to me in the first place. So I try to start with the roots of where it started.
Lisa, what's your solution for this problem?
Well, first I want to just acknowledge what Desmond said. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I'm glad that we're talking about nutrition from a standpoint of mental health, because we've all, I think, culturally accepted the fact that from the neck down, nutrition is extremely important. But I think there's still not a full understanding of how important nutrition is from the neck up. So I just want to acknowledge that. And hopefully we circle back around to the gut health and the relationship with mental health. But as far as how do we begin to heal our relationship with food, I think the first piece of advice I typically give clients is we have to detach from the constructs that society has given us, like counting calories, like doing math just to eat, right? So this associating numbers with food, points with food, overly obsessing with macros. We have to disconnect from things like everything in moderation, thinking like no matter how unhealthy something is, we can still have it as long as it's in a made up size called moderation, which is different from everybody. So I think just starting to build our own relationship with food is all about recognizing that, number one, food is information. And while our body has the technology to heal us, to keep us whole, to prevent disease, it is our responsibilities as the carriers of these bodies to give our bodies the raw material it needs to accurately use the technology. So one, food is information above everything else. And while we use it for pleasure, we use food to, break bread, we use food to entertain. The first and primary point of food is information for the body, and it is the raw materials that our body and our brains need to thrive. And so I believe we begin working and improving our relationship with food by recognizing that first we must begin eating from a biological perspective and not a behavioral perspective. And when I say behavioral, it means that most of us, say we eat based on what we feel like. We eat based on what we're in the mood for. We eat based on emotions, but very, very rarely are we thinking, have I gotten in my micronutrients today? Did I get enough vitamins and minerals? Did I get my fiber in, my antioxidants, my water? So we need to start eating from a biological perspective first. And then again, disconnecting from these made up constructs, like breakfast is a made up construct, 3 meals a day is a made up construct, counting calories, we shouldn't have to do that. And so it's all of these rules about food that are so man-made. But if we begin to eat more intuitively based on what the body and brain needs to thrive, then we can have a healthy relationship instead of thinking we need to do math and associate all of these systems with food, and it's just not necessary. So approaching it more intuitively as opposed to made up constructs would be my advice.
I really like the analogy you gave with food being information and the body processing it through its technology. Could you maybe expound upon that a little bit more and why you chose that analogy?
100%. So we need about 102 vitamins and minerals to thrive. And of course, we need our macronutrients. So macros are proteins, carbs, and fats, but those 102 vitamins and minerals are what we call micronutrients. And all of those things pair with our body in order to do things like stave off disease and disability, in order to give us energy, in order to improve our immunity, our digestion. So everything we get from raw plant-based foods, and not raw meaning we have to eat a full raw diet, but I mean eating food that is as unmanipulated as possible. So we do the manipulation as much as possible, the cooking, the juicing, the blending, right? So when we get away from the ultra processed foods and we really eat foods as close to their original form as possible, that means the molecular structure is still intact. And when you consume food that has not been manipulated by man and the molecular structure is still intact, our body can read the food, our body can extract the vitamins and minerals from it, disseminate it throughout our body into all of our vital organs, and turn the rest into waste. But when we're eating ultra processed foods that have been highly manipulated, highly processed, a lot of chemicals and preservatives added for shelf life and palatability, now we have disrupted the integrity of the food. It's no longer information, but it's doing the opposite. It's literally shortening our life as opposed to expanding it and extending it and improving the quality of it. And so when I say food is information, I'm really talking about those micronutrients that our body needs in order to thrive. Everything from the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, the fiber, the water, the phytonutrients. All of those things are what our body uses to do the amazing thing that is chemistry in our bodies every day to keep us alive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Des, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, that was beautifully said, because I love the point that you made where you said that breakfast is the made up construct, and it goes perfectly with this book that I'll maybe recommend as the recommendation of the week this week, called The Mastery of Self. And what it essentially, it doesn't really go into, food per se, but it goes into this concept of domestication and how through generations, what foul constructs or concept, I should say, that are passed down from generation to generation, we domesticate our offsprings with these same bad habits. And so I remember when I was younger, I hated breakfast. Like, just eating in the morning didn't make the most sense to me. And then so I look at my son, and he's the exact same way. And he is just not someone that really enjoys eating breakfast. And so I have to constantly, check myself and remind myself that I can't domesticate him the same way that maybe my parents tried to domesticate me, where it's like, oh, if you don't eat, then, you're going to have an attitude, or if you don't eat, you're not going to have the energy to get through the day, where it's just, maybe it's not time, for me to eat. Like, my body clock I haven't hit that point in the day to where my body is saying, feed me. And I love the fact that you said that, because we've been domesticated to the point to where we think these things are natural per se, and there's nothing natural about it. The easiest way I can correlate to it is that in nature, you don't have a luxury of eating 3 times a day. In nature, you have the luxury of eating when food is, provided to, whether it be your tribe, or if your tribe goes out and, they're hunter-gatherers, then you only have the privilege of eating when the hunter-gatherers do their job. And so I love that analogy, because with me, and, me just really understanding my body and that breakfast isn't for me, I started fasting. And what I realized was that around between noon and 2 p.m., that's when my body clock was ready to consume. And whatever I was consuming at that point, it provided energy. Whereas if I'm consuming breakfast just for the sake of consuming breakfast, I'm immediately groggy. I have brain fog. Like, doing my day-to-day tasks, it seems like I'm climbing up a hill every single day, rather just being, clockwork as it should be. So I love that analogy.
Nice. Yes, very nice. And I love what you're describing, Desmond, when you say just like being careful not to domesticate your son, is called epigenetics, right? And so epi, the prefix meaning above, and above the gene, meaning our environment teaches us things. The environment that we in, the things that we learn from our parents, the things that are passed down from our, offspring, things that didn't come in our genes, but they become behavioral because we are modeling behavior. And so a lot of the behaviors that we participate in and the belief systems we have are not natural things that we genetically need or that genetically appeal to us, but it's just epigenetics. It's just influence from our environment, right? Kind of nature versus nurture concept. So I'm glad that you're being conscious of that fact and not succumbing to it, even though it's what the masses is doing.
Yeah.
So good for you.
Thank you.
Josh, do you hate breakfast too?
Just like merging traffic.
No, I don't hate breakfast. I only eat when I'm hungry. So, I don't ever wake up and be like, I'm about to get breakfast, no matter if I'm hungry or not. But I don't know. I never, when it comes to breakfast, I'm kind of on the same thing with Des. Not that it didn't really make sense to me, but it was just more of, I don't have to eat. Of course, you hear from your mom like, oh, you have to eat to have the energy, or it's the most important meal of the day. But I never really had to eat breakfast. I could have waited until 12 or 2 to eat. Like a lot of times I only eat like once a day because that's just how I feel, But yeah. One thing I wanted to ask, like, how much of this, you mentioned the nutrients being taken out because all of the manipulation from people in these companies, but how much of these nutrients are actually taken out of these food? Is it a significant amount, or?
Yeah, it really is a significant amount. So even, it just really depends on what food you're talking about specifically. But even, let's just simply talk about flour. So flour in itself, or the grains that are used for flour, a lot of those nutrients that you're going to get, whether you're talking about certain minerals, vitamins, whatever that is, a large majority of them you're going to get from the fiber or the bran in it, or that outer layer, and all of that is stripped to make white flour. So white flour, things like that, you're just pretty much just getting straight carbohydrates. All these nutrients that are in those bran layers and those fibrous layers have been stripped off. So as soon as you take away fiber from grains, a good, even some, depending on the grains, some up to 80% of the nutrients could be gone. So at that point, you're just getting carbohydrates. You're losing all of those micronutrients, all of that fiber that builds balance in your gut, that builds improved immune system, that builds improved energy levels. All of it is just gone.
Wow. What do you supposed to do?
Yeah, I love that you asked that particular question. There's I don't want to consider him an influencer, but there's a gentleman on Instagram and probably other numerous social media platforms. I think his name is Yakai Awaken, and he was on 19 Keys as a higher level conversation podcast last year. And the thing that he mentioned the most is that once you light fire to something, it changes its, I don't want to sound like I'm, a scientific or nutritionist expert, but he said, I think it changes like its molecular structure or something. Can you, expound on that a bit?
That is true. It does change its molecular structure, but not always for the bad, just to be clear, but it does change its molecular structure. So there is benefits to eating raw foods, of course, that haven't been processed by heat. And then there's also, though, some things that are ignited, like some nutritional components that are ignited through heat, right? So while heat can ruin some things, it can also be beneficial to some foods as well. Like one example is tomatoes, right? There's some benefits by eating them raw on a sandwich and a salad, but then there's also benefits you get by heating them up, a pasta sauce or chili. And so not everything is completely ruined by heat unless the heat is extremely high and you're charring the food, right? Like I know sometimes when we grill, for example, we like things really crisp. You can really, or another example too is With vegetables, if your vegetables are limp and have no crunch in them, if you're like cooking your greens for hours, you've literally cooked all the nutrients out of them. So you want to make sure your vegetables always still have a crunch, for example. So you can overly process a food with too much heat, but cooking everything is not necessarily a bad thing. I highly recommend a great blend of raw and cooked food every day.
100% agree with Lisa. It's really just depends on, because certain depending on the fruit or vegetable, or even if you do decide to eat meat, whatever that might be, depending on the heating method itself, and then also the item itself would depend on what nutrient or whatever might be manipulated more. So some nutrients, or in some foods, when you cook them, those nutrients might be more bioavailable, but other ones, if you cook them, they might be less bioavailable, or they actually might leach out. And for example, you will lose them in the cooking process and you wouldn't be getting them at all. So it really just depends on which fruit, vegetable, meat product, whatever you're talking about.
So
Bruce,
go ahead.
No, please.
I was gonna say, so that makes me think of two examples. Like the first example, I'll be more on the healthy plane. It'll be like asparagus. For me, I hate my asparagus when it's soggy, and I always aim to, when I saute it, to make sure it has still a crunch, but it's not too hard but not too soft. It has like that happy medium to where every bite has like a nice little crunch to it, but it doesn't feel like you're eating a carrot. So it sounds like I'm on the right track when I'm cooking it just to that point. I'm not cooking it to the point to where I'm, I guess you could say, pulling all the nutrients from it, but there is still a little bit of nutrient pulling by me not eating that raw, I assume.
Yeah, and sometimes just buy organic asparagus and slice it up and just put it on top of a salad raw and don't cook it at all. 100%. Yeah.
See, I love my asparagus having a little salt and garlic taste to it. But there's another one. So we're talking about mental health. We're talking about gut health. So obviously I've already discussed that a lot of things are centered around like the fitness industry is your protein. So are you able to, either you, Bruce, or Lisa, are able to expand on like the benefits? Because in the Black community, every mother wants their steak well done. And of course, I was the same exact way until I got into like my late teens, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm gonna try a medium steak. And I tried it, and it was greatness. So when you're cooking your meats, whether it be salmon, your chickens, I think everybody for the most part cooks chicken to, it's a well done point.
Yeah.
Are we?
As you should. Please do not cook a medium chicken. You will be in the hospital.
Are there any dangers to us like eating like salmon or steaks, for example, at that medium point, or should we be aiming more towards like a medium well done?
Yeah, so similarly to vegetables and fruits, it depends on what specific protein you're talking about. Some proteins you can eat to more of that medium, even for some of them rare, like some cuts of beef. But for example, even we'll talk about beef alone, not even other protein sources. If you're talking about like a fillet, yes, you can. But if you're talking about ground meat, then no, you can't, because ground meat has a lot of different parts of that beef. Some of those parts of beef might carry more bacteria versus less. But then also because of how since it's ground, now you have a difference in surface area that can pack more bacteria further in, as opposed to just being on top. So something like that, you have to cook to a certain internal temperature to kill all that bacteria, because you want that cooking to penetrate all the way through, as opposed to like a steak. Of course, as long as it's fresh, the longer it sits out, the more that bacteria and everything and all that those diseases can penetrate. But as long as it's fresh, or as close to fresh as possible, then once you cook that to even rare, in theory, that should be warm enough to kill the bacteria, because bacteria can only grow in a certain temperature range.
I also want to take a moment to share a recent discovery or a recent journey of mine. So I always wanted to try bison meat. I've known that it was a leaner alternative to beef, and I was very pleased with the results of it. My grandfather cooked some when I went home and visited, and it was amazing. So I do want to encourage our listeners or anybody, if you're open to eating meat. I think, Lisa, you're fully plant-based,
Mhm.
but I definitely encourage that if you are open to that, to seek more, I guess, or less conventional alternatives when it comes to your protein.
Agreed.
I can tell you how to
Uh,
cook black beans. Well done.
Tell me.
I'm just joking. I like my quinoa and my black beans very well done. My tofu a little crisp on the outside, soft on the inside. In case anybody was wondering.
Lisa, I do have a question for you. At one point in your journey in life, did you decide to go vegan, and what difficulties did you experience when you switched from animal products to completely vegan?
Going vegan was a decision. It was a professional decision. I was a personal trainer at the time, and I started studying nutrition just to see which nutritional protocol would be the most optimal for my clients. Discovered a whole food plant-based diet, which has been the only diet proven to arrest and reverse the #1 cause of death in the US, which is heart disease. So I got super intrigued, started studying nutrition science, ended up getting certified in plant-based nutrition, retiring from being a personal trainer, and now all I do is teach nutrition full-time and now business full-time. But what difficulties did I have, Bruce? I would say availability, and this is typically based on where you are geographically, right? But I'm in Michigan right now, and so when I went vegan maybe 7 years ago, just as far as just options, if I wanted to dine out, was more of an issue, more of a challenge, because of where I was in the Metro Detroit area. So I think that was the biggest thing. But as far as like transitioning and it being difficult from a personal standpoint, no, because it was too much data to back up the efficacy of the lifestyle. It's just the benefits have been through the roof. The #1 benefit for me personally has been cognitively, how my brain works, how my mind works, the mental clarity, the creativity, the recall, the memory is insane, the ability to concentrate, the ability to problem solve, just my executive functioning, because I create content for a living, create curriculums for a living. And so I was already at healthy weight. I didn't have any pre-existing conditions. So for me, what I noticed the most is how my mind worked. Yeah, super dope.
Awesome.
At the top of the
No, go ahead, Brian.
So at the top of the recording, Bruce, you said something that I feel was extremely prolific, was the fact that nutrition is the building blocks, basically, of life. And so I think in order for us to have a healthy relationship with food, that we have to understand why food is important. And it starts with that. We are quite literally what we eat. And so practicing nutrition is a form of self-love. And I don't know about your upbringing or how familiar you are with the biblical text, but to paraphrase from the Apostle Paul, our body is God's temple. So agnostic of what you believe, I'm not here to preach, but we treat our bodies, we desecrate our bodies in ways which we would not treat our places of worship. And so I think that's a perspective shift that a lot of us need to have, is to understand how sacred nutrition is. It's not just something to satiate you in the interim until your next meal or whatever. This is literally how you build life. And one of the things that we really need to do is we need to understand the barriers of why people don't, if we want to address this and fix this problem in our communities. And two of the biggest barriers that I've come across were it doesn't taste good and then it costs too much. Those are two of the biggest barriers to healthy eating that I've encountered in my family and just in modern discourse online that I've seen. And I'll give my take on combating those two things. So to it doesn't taste good, we first have to understand our biology. So we're hardwired to value high calorie, nutrient dense food, and that's often accompanied with salty and fatty tastes from our ancestors. And they lived a very different lifestyle, as you alluded to earlier, Des. Whether they're hunter-gatherers, it was very unpredictable, so they had to take in as much nutrients as they could at a given time. However, our lifestyles have changed, but our underlying wiring, so our circuitry is still intact. So we still have those urges. And so that's why we have these companies such as Lay's and all these other snack giants that have whole departments just designed to figure out what's the ideal crunchiness, the ideal saltiness of a potato chip to keep you hooked. And so also, I think when it comes down to why people think that eating healthy is nasty, they think of the universal gym bro meal prep. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like when One Life, they had a meal prep sample that they gave you. It was a little tray, and it was this pasty white ass chicken breast. It was some plain bleached white rice, and then this almost raw broccoli. And it was so hard that I swear it would make your gums bleed. And that's what most people think about when they think of meal prep, but that's not the case. I've been doing meal prep for almost 3 years at this point, routinely, breakfast, lunch, and dinner at this point now, and it's delicious. I've had relatives of mine try my cooking. It's like, wow, this is good. He doesn't salt his food down, but once you know your way around in the kitchen, there's so many other seasonings that you can use to enhance the flavor of your food. You don't have to have that, like I said, the pasty ass chicken breast and the raw broccoli. That's just not a thing. I've never done that. And then addressing the point in which people say that it's too expensive, I will have a little bit of sympathy. I'll try to empathize with them, and I'll say, okay, healthy eating can be more expensive. It can be, but most people are poor shoppers. And just by observation, I've been very intentional about this. I've been observing what other people are buying in the grocery stores and just seeing what they load their carts with, and it's pretty telling. And I think nothing is more telling than when we're in COVID lockdown and you saw that you couldn't get a pack of chicken or pork for days, but all the fruits and vegetables were practically undisturbed. And that was highly frustrating for someone like myself who is health conscious, and I try to lead by example and help the people immediately around me, and just seeing that, especially within our community. Now, like I said, most people are poor shoppers, but just think about it this way. So I did a quick number crunch, and my groceries for a week runs me about $100. And I eat like a horse, just to be quite frank. I eat more than the average person to sustain a certain lifestyle and meet certain fitness goals. That's fine. But $100, so 100 divided by 7, that's roughly $14. So I'm eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks for $14 a day. Most people don't do that. Like when you load your cart up with a bunch of BS, like Hungry Man frozen dinners and Hot Pockets and things like that, those things, there's less nutritional value to them, and they're less financial value. And so a lot of people, they'll go for the convenience, but if you actually take the time, eating healthy doesn't have to be expensive. It really doesn't. It's a choice. Now, in regards to those two barriers that I listed, are there any additions to that list, or anything that you would like to add on and expound upon those 2 points?
Yeah, I think Brian, you really hit it on the head, specifically because, especially when you broke down the numbers, because $14-ish a day, some people will spend $14+ just going out to eat. So I mean, if you think about the trade-off, and there are people who they'll go out, like say that I always hear people say, oh, I don't have time to cook, so I just on my lunch break during work, I just gotta go get something quick. You spend $10 to $15 there anyway. But if you were to cook, you would have meals for the whole entire week. But then by the 5 days that you work, spending $10, even if it's just $10 a day, that's $50 right there that you just threw down the drain. And that's not even providing you with all your meals for the week. You're still gonna have to cook, you're still gonna have to buy groceries, still gonna have to do all this stuff. So now the money you just put on food is now, instead of just being $100, you're spending $200, even potentially sometimes $300 on food. So
exactly.
I think that those are the numbers that people really don't tend to think about.
Part of the reason, and I'm glad you triggered this thought, the reason why I made this shift towards being more conscious about what I eat is you either pay for it now or pay for it later. So let's go and say, okay, the healthy food is expensive. Okay, well, it's also expensive to go to the doctor for an amputation because you're diabetic. That was something that could have potentially been avoided because it's a consequence of your lifestyle, as you talk about a lot in your practice, Lisa. And so I looked at a lot of the people in my family as they were older and saw some of the conditions that they were plagued by, the frequent doctor visits, diabetes, pre-diabetic, high blood pressure, just hearing those buzzwords. Like as a child, just hearing this from older people in your family and knowing that I share the same genetics as them, it makes me want to do a little something differently. So I haven't had pork since 2015, haven't had McDonald's since 2015. And I've made several other changes and been a lot more health conscious. And like I said, you either end up paying for it now or later. You don't have the option not to pay. You're going to pay in time, health, or money, and you can pick which one you want to do.
Brian, you said another thing to put on the list. My question is, what is the incentive to eating healthy and living long? Because I feel like a lot of people don't share the same motivation for that incentive. A lot of people don't care about eating long. I mean, I don't care about living long because a lot of people don't want to get to the age where they have to have somebody wipe their ass or something like that. I remember a coworker saying that to me one time. So that's what I want to ask. Like, what is really the big incentive to eating healthy and living long? Because a lot of poor people who just really live in the moment have like a YOLO mentality. They're just like, do I really care? Like, I'm gonna go get my McDonald's and enjoy this Big Mac and Coke. Like, what's really the incentive to living till I'm 99? Like, what, collecting Social Security? So that's what I ask. And you can answer that before I go, if you want to.
Sure. That doesn't have to be the standard of life. So people think about a state of hyperdependency. I've heard that from my grandmother in her later years because she had stage 4 ovarian cancer, and she was talking about she didn't want to be a bird. I remember her saying something like that. And regardless of our health status, that doesn't necessarily have to be the standard. So you living to be 90 years old and needing somebody to take care of your basic biological needs, sure, that is a possibility based off of the health condition that you may be afflicted with. There's certain lifestyle choices, but it's also possible that you can live to a ripe old age and still have a decent quality of life, and it's impacted by what you do now.
I understand. No, I'm with you, but I just feel a lot of people don't think of it that way. A lot of people don't care about living to 90 or don't care about the diabetes. Because just like you, like I have a history of diabetes in my family too. My dad has diabetes. His dad has diabetes. His brother had diabetes. So I have a long history of that. So it is something I think about. But really, for me, I understand what you guys are talking about, and I agree everything. And I like how you guys went to the mental part and everything. But really, me, I had it on really looked at it from an outer layer, while you guys went in depth with it. Really, I had like a 3-step process. One, it's awareness. You have to basically know that you're eating bad food and be conscious of a change, because a lot of people will get a salad, put a whole bunch of ranch on it, and think they're actually doing something. And then the next step is you have to actually want to build a better relationship after you're aware of that, because a lot of people can be aware that they're eating bad food but not really care about it. Like I was saying, people having a YOLO mentality of I'm just gonna go get my McDonald's. It doesn't matter to me. And then after wanting to, you have to then do it, because a lot of people can want to do something and not do it, what can hold them back, whether it's like poverty of, like you said, it could be expensive even though it's not really expensive, or really the lack of knowledge. Like a lot of people don't have the knowledge that you guys are talking about right here to like, oh, okay, I do have the ability to go out and eat better. So what I really had was just a 3-step process. And then I think the biggest thing what you guys are talking about is really the discipline part. I think a lot of people don't have that discipline, but if you build up the right amount of discipline, then you can begin to build a better relationship with food and build up consistency to keep having that relationship with food. So that's really what I had. It just ends up with discipline.
What Josh? Oh,
no,
go ahead.
Go, please.
I wanted to echo what Joshua said. It reminds me of a framework I created that I teach my coaches, and it's called the Trifecta of Transformation, and he pretty much just articulated it. So the Trifecta of Transformation is the 3 things that are absolutely required for someone to effectively make lifestyle changes and lifestyle modifications, and they are desire, willingness, and capability. And so desire to actually be healthy, like Josh was like, first he said awareness, but then you have to have a desire, you have to want it, right? The next is willingness, but you can only have the willingness to get healthy once you know what's required to do so. And I think sometimes when we're having conversation with family members or friends and we're getting frustrated with them not doing the work, it's because we're confusing desire and willingness. We think someone is willing to do the work just because they're expressing the desire to have the thing. And that's not the truth. Desire and willingness is two different things. And desire and willingness are inside jobs. Nobody can give you that. You are responsible for your own desire and you are responsible for your own willingness to do the work. The capability you can outsource, right? And so that's where a great coach, a great dietitian, right? A great podcast where you can learn things. And that's what gives you the capability. But I just love that Joshua did simplify it in that way, because it's absolutely right. No matter what great tips we give around, no, healthy food can taste good, or here's how you can make it affordable, you absolutely first have to have the awareness, the desire, the willingness, and the capability.
I was going to point out I was going to ask Josh how did he come up with that list, but Josh is our master of list making here on the Infusion Breakdown show. Several times his lists have been quite amazing. And I did have a question for you, Bruce, specifically. So earlier you had mentioned that a common thing when people come to you said you're a nutritionist, a common thing that people come to you with is a concern based off the outward appearance. They're not satisfied with how they look. And it's your job, you feel, to get them to shift their paradigm from one of being outwardly focused to inwardly focused. And so how do you do that?
Yeah, normally, so it's normally anytime I have like an initial consult with anybody or start talking to somebody about whatever the goal there is, it could be losing 15 pounds, for example. There's always some other trends in their life that are related to nutrition that are also discovered. So for example, like let's say the person is bloated 24/7. And I think a large part of it too is people don't really have a good perspective on what healthy actually is. So they'll be bloated 24/7. They're like, okay, that's how I always feel. That's how I'm supposed to feel. That's just a normal thing to feel, and everybody probably feels like that. So then I'll start educating them on, this is not normal, and let's figure out exactly what this could be called. This could be related to, and we'll start going down the list. Okay, there's this and this in your diet, this in your lifestyle, this, and we'll just kind of go through the list of these are the contributing factors to what you're feeling. So I know you have this goal, but there's 3 other things that we got to figure out first before we can truly start getting to that goal 100%. So let's focus on these first. And I guarantee you that primary goal that you came to me first, it will just fall into place. But if we can get those inside problems fixed, then everything else will just come naturally.
I like what you said about addressing what is that person's norm, because our bodies are brilliant in the fact of how they're able to achieve equilibrium over the span of time when conditions change. Like the analogy of turning the temperature up in the water for the frog. It's like when you become accustomed to feeling a certain way over time, that becomes your normal. You don't know anything else. And then once something changes, then you're able to see like, oh, I was really bloated this all this time, or I was really on the verge of having a stroke because of my blood pressure or cholesterol or whatever the case might be. And so I think that's to go about addressing that. And for someone like myself, if I'm not a trained nutritionist, I'm just somebody who tries to practice and lead by example, how could someone like myself have those conversations with relatives or people that I care about that voice that same concern to me?
Yeah, and I think really where it stems from is, especially if it's somebody personally, kind of know just their normal daily activities, their ins and outs, kind of like what makes them tick. So especially we always hear, people close to us complaining about like they want to do this or that. And I really like the breakdown of those essentially those goals, with especially the desire and the willingness that Lisa had mentioned, because that's prime. You'll always hear that with family. they may be aware or have the desire, but do they actually have the willingness or the motivation to do what needs to be done to get to where they want to get to? Nine times out of 10, the answer is no. So at that point, you knowing that person, you can kind of help steer them in the right direction. Be like, hey, you told me this is your goal. What you're doing is not leading you to that goal. So what do you need to help, or how can I help you get to that point where, okay, I'm willing to actually make these lifestyle changes to get to this goal? Because you're not heading in the right direction right now. And I feel like a lot of times people need that little nudge, because people aren't really long-term thinkers oftentimes, to know that what they're doing now is not leading them in the right direction.
And if I would just add one thing, just from being a personal trainer, from years ago, when you say like, when people want to change externally, how do you get them to focus on what's inside and focus on like being healthy from the inside out? I would actually argue, what's wrong with letting them have an aesthetic go? Because they're going to get the internal benefits as well. So you can do the work of redirecting them and trying to get them to see the bigger picture around longevity or quality of life or feeling better, and identifying what may be dysfunctional that they've normalized. But you also could just take the journey with them and be like, okay, you want a smaller waist, you want a flatter tummy, you sick of your, what's wrong with that being the focus initially? Because they're still going to exercise, they're still going to change their diet. And if we're talking about mental health, honestly, putting emphasis on wanting to change aesthetically actually impacts your mental health, right? Like, because the way we see ourselves, with so many people having body dysmorphia, when your body is changing, you're starting to feel more comfortable in your skin. And this is coming from somebody who used to be obese. I used to be 65 pounds heavier than what I am now. How we look and how we see ourselves in the mirror every single day impacts our mental health like crazy. Similar to what Desmond started off talking about, like you're scrolling, you're seeing fitness magazines, you're seeing all these pictures, you see gym clothes, you feel pressure to look a certain way, especially younger people on social media. So if someone leads with that, my advice will be to fall in line. You can have the bigger conversation about overall health later, but what's wrong with being aesthetically motivated?
Okay, I can certainly appreciate that too, because a lot of people do need an initial buy-in for them to adopt any new thing that they're doing, and that's exactly what you're detailing there. And so, as a follow-up to that, okay, so let's say we do that. What do you say about the difference between having a goal, being goal-oriented, and lifestyle-oriented? This is a topic that was delved into in Atomic Habits, and so what you're detailing here is, okay, they want the smaller waist in this example, so that's a goal. And they achieve that. Who's to say that they won't slip out of line with that if they don't make the adjustment to lifestyle? So how do you transition between the goal phase and the lifestyle phase?
So a good coach is going to be able to redirect the conversation as you go. What you just want to be careful of is making people feel like what they want initially, that it's not enough or it's not good right now. It's going to get them to the goal. But if they have a great coach, you want to make sure that they're making decisions along the way that do improve longevity naturally. So like a whole food plant-based diet, what I teach, what I practice, and what I teach is going to do both. It's going to give you the small waist, it's going to give you the abs, it's going to reduce your body fat, but then it's also going to significantly reduce your chances of heart disease and type 2 diabetes, right? And so if you invest in a coach who has the knowledge overall, they're going to know to allow you to start where you need to start, to get moving, to start changing dietarily, and like you said, being goal oriented, which is fine. But then also, once we reach that goal, now we get to reset the clock and create a new goal. Okay, so if you have a great coach, you can just create another goal and knock that one out too, and keep stacking them up. But the aesthetic goal, I mean, I think it's a beautiful place to start for a lot of people, because most people don't have it in them to be innately disciplined and driven if they can't physically see changes. Like, we can tell them all day, your arteries are dilating, your blood is flowing better, it's amazing. Like, but they like, but my thighs though, right? And so if people need to see their body physically changing in order to be like, okay, now what you say about this could potentially prevent heart disease, then let's get it either way. I don't care which comes first, right? And so I just reset a new goal, and just don't try and force what you think they should prioritize on people. And it's my whole point.
That's a beautiful explanation. I think that's a personal point of failure of mine. When people who I care about came to me, is trying to pivot that into the lifestyle before addressing their initial point, which is the goal. I do want to pivot and go back to something that Des and Lisa, you both wanted to talk about, the enteric nervous system, the gut health, and the link between that and mental health. And I guess let's just start there.
Okay, I'll start really quickly. So the gut is the second brain, as a lot of people have heard. It is one of the most important components of our health overall. Our gut is our microbiome that houses trillions of bacteria, and it is responsible for housing over 60% of our immune system. But one of the most important things when it comes to mental health that most people don't realize, it is where the majority of our serotonin is produced. Serotonin is that neurotransmitter that plays a key role in things like mood disorders, and disposition. And so for us to produce an adequate amount of serotonin to stave off things like depression, and for us to feed our brain the raw materials it needs to be whole and healthy, our gut absolutely must be healthy. So we must be eating, number one, a high fiber diet. We should be consuming 30 grams of fiber a day or more to make sure we're feeding the good gut bugs and we're not feeding the bad gut bugs. The bad gut bugs love what we call SOS, salt, oil, and sugar. And so those unhealthy bacteria are going to thrive, and it's going to cause us to have a really acidic microbiome. And so to move toward a more alkaline microbiome, to produce healthy amounts of neurotransmitters without psychotropic drugs having to interfere, in order for us to have a healthy immune system, but most importantly, in order for us to feed our brain. Our brain is extremely vascular, and the same arteries that get clogged that lead to our heart, that causes a heart attack, those same arteries can get clogged that lead to the brain. Our brain is extremely vascular, and that vascularity is responsible for delivering those micronutrients talked about earlier, the vitamins and minerals. So that's how we have a healthy mental health, is with the same foods and the same raw materials that keeps us healthy from the neck down. And so everything starts with the gut. So anybody who's listening to this, if you have digestive health issues, if you're chronically constipated, if you your stomach hurts every time you eat fiber, if you're dealing with things like colitis, IBS, Crohn's disease, you want to do everything in your power. Specifically, I would primarily recommend removing acidic animal protein, removing SOS, salt, oil, and sugar, doing an elimination diet, getting rid of all dairy. I don't know if I said sugar, but let me say it 8th and 9th time. You have to remove all refined sugar out of your diet. Refined sugar is one of the worst things you can put in your body. All processed sugar, all those acidic drinks, a ton of caffeine. You really want to, if you want to restore the gut to optimal functionalities, for the sake of mental health, you want to consume a mostly whole food, plant-based diet, and really prioritize getting rid of ultra processed food, whether it's vegan or not, because all vegan food ain't healthy. So let me be clear, I'm not promoting a vegan diet. I'm promoting a primarily plant-based diet. And that is how we begin to restore the gut health. Sorry, Desmond, if I took over. I got kind of excited.
No, you didn't take over. I didn't really have anything I wanted to input it because I actually want to hear what Bruce has to say next, and then I wanted to tailor a response specifically to me. So I'm gonna let Bruce cover it first, and then we'll dive into something for me.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things that Lisa said. So one part that, and I'm glad that you also mentioned that, Lisa. Really, not all vegan foods are healthy. Being vegan does not automatically make you healthy, and it will not in any way, shape, or form. Being vegan in itself, with any diet, whether you're having like a mainstream, like just traditional American diet, whether you're vegan, whether you want to try the ketogenic diet, whatever, every single one poses some kind of health complications. So if you're not knowledgeable, then you're gonna have problems. So I do want to say, I think being searching for organic and whole foods is definitely the right way to go. But I also think it's important to acknowledge that being completely vegan isn't always the best strategy for everyone. So I think it's really just about, from person to person, let's try and find the balance. What is going to work best for you, for your lifestyle, for longevity, for you to be able to be happy with your relationship with food. Because if somebody wants to be 100% vegan, and I'm all for it, but I think we just need to also acknowledge that that's just not a lifestyle that would be fit for everybody.
Where does that misconception come from of like all vegan food is healthy food?
I think it really stems from the fact that people hear vegetables and assume that vegetables are healthy, but with vegetables, it also largely comes into how you cook those vegetables, and how you prepare those vegetables. So, you're eating, deep frying some okra. People are like, yeah, I had my vegetables today, but you deep fried okra. It's still deep fried food. You're still getting a whole bunch of saturated trans fats, all this stuff that's still clogging your arteries. So just because you're eating okra, still largely dependent on how you're preparing that food, just whether it's meat or vegetables. That's one thing that people forget a lot.
Gotcha. Well, I have another question. So if you have like an autoimmune disease, like could a better diet help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Lisa said, your gut is really your second brain. So that deals a lot with your neurotransmitters and can help enhance your functionality and alertness of your brain, but it also largely deals with your immune system, like she said too. So if you have a healthy immune system, or healthy gut, I'll say, then your immune system will also react accordingly and won't necessarily overreact to stimuli like an autoimmune disease. But in an autoimmune disease, all it is your immune system is overreacting to stimuli that they're not supposed to overreact to, because your body gets confused. So a lot of that deals with your hormonal balance, which a lot of that also connects right back into gut health. Your gut bacteria also affects directly into your immune system. So, really, like Lisa said, your gut is, if you have a healthy gut, everything else just comes secondary if you have food.
Okay. So there's no like number of like, oh, I can't have 45 grams of sugar on like every day or something, like, so you shouldn't be going by numbers at all? Is that what you guys are saying?
It depends. Once again, I would say it depends on the person, because I've dealt with several clients who are very strongly number based, and numbers is the only thing that works for them. That's not to say that numbers is the only way to be successful, or like, let's say if we're dealing with a diabetic, for somebody who has diabetes and needs to be measuring their blood sugar, we need to talk about numbers. We need to make sure we're adhering to certain numbers so that we can prioritize blood sugar balance. For somebody who's an average individual, or let's say somebody who just has a weight loss goal, numbers might not be the most advantageous thing for them. Or if somebody possibly has a history with eating disorders, numbers definitely might not be something that will help them. So it really just depends on the person as to whether or not numbers will work or not.
Okay.
Des, I'm curious to hear what you had to say about gut health and your response to what Lisa and Bruce just shared.
So, by no way, shape, or form am I a professional in any aspect of nutrition, mental health, or anything along those lines. But I am somebody that has had, trials and tribulations with my mental health. And so if we flash back to around 2015, 2016, that was around the time I found out that I was having my son. And of course, having a kid at, 21, 22 years old at the time, it triggers a lot of things, whether it be traumas, whether it be fear, whether it be anxiety. It triggers all of those things. And of course, within those, bad eating can be a big factor that comes with it. And so I just recall at that time having like great deals of brain fog, not being able to articulate my words in a way that I once was able to. My focus was like in the gutter. Like I just was a shell of who I was as a person. And so the very first thing that I did to kind of like reclaim my identity was fasting. The first form of fasting I did was like, 12 p.m. to 8. So I think that's 16/8 in the fasting realm. And what I initially realized when I was fasting was, okay, I'm delaying an insulin response per se, but I'm not changing the foods that I'm eating. I'm still eating Chick-fil-A. I'm still eating Wendy's. I'm still eating garbage. So even though my energy may be up, slightly, like a few percentage points, it's not a life-changing, effect. It doesn't have a life-changing effect. And then so as I gradually got deeper and deeper into fitness, I started meal prepping like Brian has stated. I was doing my black beans, my rice, my ground turkey, and chicken breast, predominantly white meats, and then occasional red meat, here and there. And I just noticed how I never really reclaimed my prior self. I don't think we ever really reclaim previous versions of ourselves. We just elevate and unlock higher versions of ourselves. And I was really able to get into that point to where I figured out what worked for me. And I've always been pro therapy on the podcast. I'll never be anti-therapy, because I think therapy is always the first building block in mental health, because sometimes you need someone to come in and say, you're overthinking X, Y, and Z, but let's go back to A, B, and C and put all these pieces into play to where you can get back and, revamp your X, Y, and Z. And so once I got to that point where I figured out what was triggering, my anxiety, my depression, then it was a lot easier to commit to these dietary changes. And I noticed almost instantly, the second I like fully committed to my dietary changes, life did a 180. And I'm glad Brian kind of provided this segue. What I wanted to kind of bring to you guys is, what is your view on fasting? Because I recall vividly the very first week I fasted, it was like someone flipped my world upside down in a positive way. Like I went from, needing 8 to 10 hours of sleep just to still wake up and feel tired, to where I'm going to sleep at like 10 and waking up at 4, going to sleep at 9 and waking up at 3, because my energy levels are just soared through the roof. I no longer have that, whether it be a false sense of field where I need 8 to 10 hours of sleep, or it's just that I'm so, I don't want to say I'm having a placebo effect per se, but I'm so like ingrained in this lifestyle change to where my body is just now acting accordingly. So I want to, get your perspectives on, 12 to 8 fasting, but even more recently, I've done 22/2 fasting. And every time I bring that up to somebody, they're like, how do you do that? And I'm just like, it's not that hard. Like once you break your bad relationship with food and you really just start to listen and respond, it becomes the easiest thing to do. And so I won't sit here and say like I have the perfect diet. With my 22/2, I've been doing a bit of herb fasting with it. So there are certain blends that I'll mix into like my water or my black coffee in the morning. And I know people always say like black coffee can trigger an insulin response, so then technically you're not fasting. But in some cases I've seen to where it's like it stemmed my hunger to where I haven't really had that desire to eat. But I really wanted to get, your professional take on fasting, and, any myths that, can be debunked, or any facts that can be reaffirmed.
Okay, I'll start. Desmond, I just want to say I'm so proud of you. I just want to start there. For you recognizing that something had to change and you taking the initiative to do it. Like, kudos to you. Your baby is so lucky to have you. 100%. fasting is so powerful. So I personally practice intermittent fasting. We teach it to our students. We highly recommend 16/8 because scientifically that is the one that there's really never been any exceptionally like super scientific relevance past 16 hours, more than that, showing its extreme benefit, unless you go days, right? And that's when we start tapping even more into like the spiritual aspect and all of that. So there's benefits of going longer than 16/8, but for people who are just doing it for physical health, the 16/8 is what we recommend our students. I personally do fasting as well, and everything you just named, as far as only typically requiring 5 to 6 hours of sleep. And the other thing is because most of our bodies, especially if you have an animal-based diet, which has a longer digestive period, our bodies are using that energy to digest food. And so when you're fasting and abstaining, you get to reroute that energy to other functions in the body, which is extremely powerful. So getting that energy back, and then also intentionally stopping eating a certain time before bed is also going to make your sleep more effective. Sleep is one of the most important components to overall health, really a healthy sleep routine and sleep hygiene. And so if your body is not trying to break down and digest food at night while you're sleeping, there is some magic that really can happen from a health standpoint while we're sleeping. So fasting, I want to reaffirm everything you said, and especially when you said abstaining from eating was one thing and I saw some benefits, but it's when I even changed my diet during my eating window where it really changed the game. That is the part, right? So it's one thing to just practice the self-control of waiting, but then when it's time to eat, if you really prioritize eating foods that are designed to nourish the body, it's going to be a game changer, because most people, honestly, walking among us are calorically full, but nutritionally they're starving. Like there's some people who haven't eaten in months or years. Right? Just calorically they're full. Like you said, Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, fast food, dirty energy, like energy drinks and caffeine and stay up. They literally don't eat any nutrition. So we're prioritizing calories when we must be prioritizing nutrition. So when you said I then decided to change what I was eating during my eating window, that is what really changes your life. And then, so from a mental health standpoint, it helps you, it re-empowers you. It brings us back to today's topic, like how do you build a healthy relationship with food? You take your control back. In most of our lives, food has more control over us than we have over it. And so for me, fasting is also a practice in self-control. Like having mastery of self and self-control is one of the sexiest things you can ever have, because when nothing has power over you, that means you are really living life on your own terms. But when you have to have sugar every day, when you gotta have your cup of coffee before anybody can say anything to you, or you absolutely need your chocolate, or you gotta have your favorite chips to watch your favorite show, you've given away so much power, and so introducing fasting for the point of self-control alone is a game changer. So I'm affirming. Well done, Desmond.
Thank you.
Yeah, from the perspective of giving you more control over your mindset and giving you a better understanding of being under your own power, having self-control over yourself. I love that perspective of fasting, of intermittent fasting, and I think that is something that can build a lot of mental fortitude. So, in terms of finding balance with blood sugar and insulin, because blood sugar also very strongly controls your hormonal balance, is you having a stable energy level, stable blood sugar throughout the day. So there are methods to do that through intermittent fasting. There also are methods to do that through by not intermittent fasting. But really what Desmond was getting to, and what Lisa mentioned too, all comes down to the foods you eat specifically. So the fasting can really enhance that as well. But at the end of the day, the fasting isn't going to matter as much if you're not also partnering it with the necessary foods. So whether you're fasting or not fasting, once again, it really boils down to the foods more than the actual methodology of the orientation of how you're eating throughout the day. So we just got to be more food conscious, as opposed to like timing conscious necessarily. If we're focusing on those nutrient dense foods, we'll be golden every time.
So I do want to be respectful of our guest time, and before we conclude today's episode, I did have one lightning round question. So I'm a huge fan of probiotic infused apricots, and that's a staple of my diet every single day. What is one superfood for the benefit of gut health that you would recommend?
Oh, I hate the superfood question. Okay, but I'll play. Superfood for gut health. For me, it would be a bean, anything that's really high fiber, but specifically, there's a certain amount of starch that's concentrated in beans that works magic for restoring gut health. So I would say it would be beans somewhere around, like it could be a black bean, a navy bean, but the molecular structure of the starch in beans has specifically been known to restore gut health.
Okay. What about you, Bruce?
I actually also hate the topic of superfoods, because oftentimes people will take the idea of a superfood and turn it into, oh, this is the end all be all. This is all I got to do. I'm so healthy now because I'm eating an avocado. Absolutely not. That is the biggest lie that media has put out there. Putting avocado on toast does not mean that you are the most health conscious person on the planet. But that's a conversation for another day. Yeah, I was gonna say beans as well. I was gonna say lentils or chickpeas specifically. I think those, especially like Lisa said, a high fiber diet of anything, especially if you're talking about like soluble fiber, because you have your two different types of fiber, your insoluble and your soluble. So that soluble fiber specifically is going to be really, really, really vital for it's really your gut bacteria's food source. So that's what your gut bacteria is really going to eat. It's going to thrive off of. It's really going to just allow the good gut bacteria to continue to grow and be healthy. So that soluble fiber also can help lower cholesterol. It can delay digestion. It can help things keep moving appropriately throughout your gut. I mean, soluble fiber, just like the health benefits go on and on. But really, like Lisa said, I think fiber is probably the number one thing that can enhance your life, but everybody just misses the fiber intake every single time.
Gotcha.
Nice. All right, thank you guys. This was really, really informative. I hope whoever's listening will get a lot out of this. But I want to thank Lisa. I want to thank Bruce for coming on. Of course, you're always a part of the Infusion Network family, so come back. Of course, please. But like I said, definitely informative. I'm probably gonna send this episode to a few people so to let them know. So, but thank you though. I know, Des, did you want to remind them of the recommendation of the week?
Yeah, the recommendation of the week is going to be The Mastery of Self by, I believe it's Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. I think it ties perfectly with this particular episode because we're talking about the mastery of self here. And I think food and our relationship with food is always going to be, like Lisa said, one of the foundational building blocks, your gut health, and just nutrition in itself being, I'm going to quote you on this one. It is the building block of our body. And so if we're gonna make these changes to become better, higher versions of ourselves, we'll start with the mastery of self, and then we'll finish it off with episode 2 of season 6 of the Infusion Breakdown Show. How do we develop a better relationship with food?
Des, if you don't mind, can I tack on an additional recommendation?
Absolutely.
Stress Proof by Dr. Minter. So I've recommended this before, but she has an entire chapter in here that talks about the enteric nervous system, and this was revolutionary in my personal journey. So I want to recommend this, give it my highest recommendation once again.
Nice. All right. Be sure to check it out. Again, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Bruce. If you guys like the discussion, don't forget to hit the like button. Of course, share it too, please, for us. Why not, right? We're going to see you guys next week. Peace.